Good evening, Frederick Douglass Elementary School. This is Mrs. Shupard, and I'm here with the last episode of Tucked In Tuesday for this school year. I hope that we'll be able to pick it up again in the fall, but we're going to be taking a little break for the summer. But I did want to make sure that we were able to finish our One Book, One Seaford book. So tonight I'm going to be reading the two final chapters of The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. Chapter 14, The World Discovers Wimbe. Despite the incident with the famine, my popularity as an inventor led to other opportunities. That same year, one of the teachers at Wimbe Primary asked if I'd be interested in starting a science club for the students. He was impressed with my windmill and wanted one on campus. The students look up to you, he said. Your skills in science will really challenge their brains. Sure, I said, I'll do it. The windmill I created for the school was small, much like my first radio experiment. For the blades, I used a metal mace pail, and the generator was a radio motor. I attached it to a blue gum pole and ran the wires into my old Panasonic 2-battery radio. I did this during recess one morning when all the kids were playing soccer. When I connected the wires, the music blasted through the schoolyard and a small riot erupted from all the excitement. The windmill not only allowed students to listen to the music and news, but they could also charge their parents' mobile phones. Each Monday, I explained to them the basics of science and gave them some popular examples of simple innovation, like how ink was first made by using charcoal. I also demonstrated the cup and string experiment featured in my books to help explain how a telephone works. I walked them through the steps of how I'd built everything using everyday materials. So many things around you are reusable, I told them. Where others see garbage, I see opportunity. I hope I was inspiring them in some way because I could teach my neighbors how to build windmills. I thought, what else could we build together? In science, we invent and create, I continued. We make new things that can benefit our situation. If we all invent something to make our lives better, we can challenge Malawi. I later found out that some of the students had been so inspired by the windmill, they'd gone home and made toy versions themselves. I imagined what it would be like if those pinwheels were real. What if every home and shop in Wimbe had machines on the rooftops and to catch the wind? At night, the entire valley would sparkle like a clear sky full of stars. Bringing electricity to my people no longer seemed like a madman's dream. In early November 2006, some officials from the Malawi teacher training activity were inspecting the library at Wimbe Primary when they noticed my windmill in the schoolyard. They asked Miss Sikelo who'd built it, and she gave them my name. One of them telephoned his boss, Mr. Hartford Mzime, and described what he'd seen. A few days later, Mr. Makazime drove 5 hours to Wimbe. He was even more amazed when he saw the larger windmill at my house and asked my father if he could speak with the boy who'd built it. He's here, my father said, and called me from my room. Mr. Makazime was an older man with gray hair and kind and patient eyes. But when he spoke, his command of language was large and powerful. I'd never heard anyone speak such good Chichewa, and when he spoke English, it was simply eloquent. He asked me about the windmill and how it came about. Tell me everything, he said. I told the story, as I'd done 100 times before, and then took him through the house demonstrating how my switches and the circuit breaker worked. He listened carefully, nodding his head, and asked specific questions. These are very tiny bulbs. Why aren't you using big ones? I can use big ones, I said, but big lights require more voltage. The dynamo is only so strong. How far did you go with your education? Just the first year at secondary school. Then how did you know this stuff about voltage and power? I've been borrowing books from your library. Who teaches you this stuff? Who helps you? No one, I said. I've been reading and doing it alone. Mr. Makazime then went to see my parents. You have lights in your house because of your son, he said. What do you think of this? We thought he was mad, my mother said. Mr. Makazime laughed and shook his head. I want to tell you something, he said. You may not realize, but your son has done an amazing thing, and this is only the beginning. You're going to see a lot more people coming here to see William Kamkwamba. I have a feeling this boy will go far. I want you to be ready. The visit left me a little confused and very excited. No one had ever asked me such questions before, and no one had taken the kind of interest. That afternoon, Dr. Makazime returned to his office in Zomba and told his colleagues what he'd seen. This is fantastic, they said. The whole world needs to know about this boy. I agree, said Dr. Makazime, and I have just the idea. The next week, Dr. Makazime returned to my house with a journalist from Radio 1. It was the famous Everson Masaya, whose voice I've heard for years. He'd come to my house to interview me. What do you call this thing? He asked. I'm calling it electric wind. But how does it work? The blades spin and generate power from a dynamo. And in the future, what do you want to do with this? I want to reach every village in Malawi so people can have lights and water. While we waited for Radio 1 interview to air, Mr. Makazime came with even more reporters. These men represented all of the great media organizations in Malawi, Medici and Zodiac radio channels, the Daily Times, the Nation, and Malawi News. They poured out of the car with their cameras and tape recorders and flocked around the windmill. For 2 hours, they moved through the house, elbowing and shoving one another to get the best pictures of my switches and battery system. You've had your time. Now it's my turn. Move aside. My paper is bigger. Soon, our yard was filled with crowds from the trading center who'd come to gawk at the famous journalist. Look, it's Noel Mbukwi from Zodiac, they said. Finally, we see his face. What a handsome man. And he's interviewing William. One of the reporters even climbed my tower and studied the blades in the chain system, taking pictures the whole time. Makazime, this chap is a genius, he shouted. Yes, he answered, and this is the problem with our system. We're losing talent like this all the time as a result of poverty, and when we do send them back to school, it's not a good education. I'm bringing you here because I want the world to see what this boy has done, and I want them to help. Like me, Dr. Makazime's father had also been a poor farmer who struggled to feed and clothe his family, but he knew the value of an education. At one point, when Dr. Makazime was young, he had volunteered to drop out of school and work so his brothers could go instead. His father refused, saying, all of my kids will stay in school and I'll do whatever it takes. It took nearly 10 years for Dr. Makazime to complete his secondary education. He later earned degrees from universities in Malawi, America, Britain, and South Africa. Before working for the MTTA, he'd written many Malawian textbooks, including my own Standard 8 English Reader. The day after the journalist came to visit, the interview finally aired on Radio 1. I was behind the house chatting with my aunt when my mother shouted, William, quick, it's coming on. My family gathered around the radio and I heard the announcer say, a boy in Wimbe near Kasungu has made electric wind. When my voice came through the speakers, my sister began to cheer. If the radio show weren't enough good fortune, the story in the Daily Times was published the following week and the big headline said, school dropout with a streak of genius. The story had a photo of me pretending to connect the wires to the battery in my room, still unable to wipe the smile from my face. That afternoon, I took the paper to the trading center to show everyone what the madman had done. We also hear you on the radio, they said. We're so impressed at how well you spoke. In a way, it took having these reporters come to my house to make our own town accept my windmill. After the media coverage, the number of visitors to my house increased tenfold. Shortly after, I started some much-needed improvements on the windmill. I realized the big mango tree behind the latrine was blocking my strongest wind, and I needed to go higher. My father, with the Daily Times story under his arm, was able to convince the manager of the tobacco estate to give me several giant poles, which I used to build a tower that was 36 feet high. Once I moved it away from the mango tree, the speed of my blades doubled, and so did the voltage. The day after the Daily Times article ran, a Malawian in Lilongwe named Soyapi Mumba brought the article to his office. Soyapi worked as a software engineer and a coder at Baobab Health Partnership, an American charity organization that was working to computerize Malawi's healthcare system. One of Soyapi's colleagues, a tall American named Mike McKay, liked the article about my windmill so much that he wrote about me in his blog, Hacktivate. That blog entry caught the attention of Emeka Okafor, a famous Nigerian author and blogger who was also the program director of something called the TED Global Conference. Well, Emeka wanted me to apply for an official fellowship at his conference for 3 weeks, tried very hard to find me. After harassing the reporters at the paper every day, he finally tracked down Dr. Makazime. In mid-December 2006, Dr. Makazime came to my home with an application and paperwork for TED. We sat down under the mango tree and he helped me answer a list of questions, plus write a small essay about my life. When I left, I still had no idea what TED was, though. I do now. It means technology, entertainment, and design, and it's an annual meeting where scientists and innovators get together and share their big ideas. I wasn't entirely sure what a conference was or what people did at such things. The application didn't even say where it was held. I suspected Lilongwe, the capital, but I didn't know. I imagined myself walking those busy streets and seeing all sorts of new people, and I wondered what clothes I would need to wear since everything I owned hung from a rope in my bedroom and was covered in roof dust. Even still, it gave me something to dream about. The following week, Dr. Makazime called to say that TED had chosen me. The conference would be held in Arusha, Tanzania, an entirely different country. You'll be honored with other scientists and inventors, he said. People from all over the world will be there. Perhaps something good can come of it. Wow, Arusha. How long would a bus ride take, and what if I got hungry? I'd have to bring plenty of food, perhaps cakes and roasted maize. After all, I had no money. One important thing, he said, we should book your flight before it fills up. I am traveling by plane. My God. Yes, and they wish to know if you want a smoking or non-smoking room at the hotel. I'm staying at a hotel? I thought for sure I'd be sleeping in one of those guest houses near the boozing dens where poor people stay. Of course you're staying in a hotel, he said, and I have other good news. William, you're going back to school. After visiting my house with the reporters, Dr. Makazime approached the government about accepting me into a school. He'd even taken a collection among his colleagues to help pay for my first semester. The process had taken months. Finally, the Ministry of Education had granted me permission to attend Medici Secondary, a public boarding school an hour from my home. It wasn't one of the science-based schools I'd longed to attend. The headmaster at those places weren't willing to accept me on account of my old age and number of years I'd been a dropout. However, the headmaster at Medici, Mr. Ronex Banda, was so moved by my story that he offered to spend an extra time with me, helping me catch up. I was terribly behind. While Dr. Makazime planned my trip to Arusha, I packed my things and went to school. This was the first time I'd ever lived away from home. In my suitcase, I packed a toothbrush and toothpaste, flip-flops, a blanket, and my dirt-stricken clothes. I carried it out through the courtyard and stopped under the mango tree where Jeffrey and my parents were waiting. I guess I'll see you soon, I told them. Work hard, my father said. I want you to know we're very proud. Jeffrey strapped my suitcase to his bicycle and we rolled it toward the truck stop. Along the way, I said goodbye to Gilbert. We don't have phones, so how will we talk? He asked. It will be difficult, I said. Maybe I can come visit you there. Oh, Gilbert, that would be great. Please do. I'll miss you, friend. For sure. A pickup soon appeared in the cloud of dust. Jeffrey waved his hand and flagged down the driver. I'll see you when school ends, he said. When you arrive, find someone with a phone and send me their number. We'll talk this way. I'll make sure Gilbert is there. That would be good, I said. Take care of my windmill, will you? Let me know everything that happens. Sure. Don't worry. I climbed aboard with the other passengers, found a sack of charcoal for a seat, and rolled toward Kansunga. Once there, I caught the minibus down the M1 highway to a small town of Medici. The minibus dropped me at the junction on the outskirts of town where a long road led to the school. I walked a kilometer with my suitcase bouncing behind on the gravel road until I stood outside the gates. In a matter of minutes, I had a dorm room and dorm mates, meal times, and a rigorous schedule of classes. Everything was new and foreign and a little overwhelming, but my God, what a pleasure it was to be learning in a real school. The classrooms in Medici were solid roofs that didn't leak and smooth, unblemished concrete floors. Large windows let in the sunshine but kept out the cold. I had an actual desk of my own, complete with a pencil holder. During study sessions at night, real fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, or at least they did when there wasn't a blackout. Science class was held in an actual chemistry lab where the shelves were lined with microscopes, giant coils of high-resistance wire, glass beakers, and old jars of boric acid. If you can believe it, one of the first lessons in science class was how current passes to an electric bell. I'd already applied this concept with my windmill and circuit breaker, but having it explained in scientific terms and in English was like hearing it for the first time. But like every other school in Malawi, Medici relied on the government to survive. Unlike some of the more prestigious boarding schools, it had been forgotten. Most of the equipment in the science lab was old and no longer worked. The chemicals had expired and were dangerous. The microscopes were rusted and shattered and scratched. For the electric bell lecture, we had no batteries to supply the power. If anyone has an extra one in their rooms, I'd be happy to demonstrate, the teacher said. No one did, so we used our imaginations. Our dorms were also dirty and the walls were covered with graffiti. The urinals in the bathrooms didn't work, so the new students, namely me, had to clean them out every day and keep down the smell. The rooms themselves were so cramped that we each had to share our bed with another boy. My bedmate was a guy named Kennedy who never cleaned his socks. Hey man, you need to wash your feet before you come to bed with me, I told him. Sorry, I can't ever tell, he said. I'll wash tomorrow, promise. But he never did. Often I'd wake up with his feet touching my mouth. And because I was years older than everyone else, some of the students teased me. They shouted, "How many kids did you leave behind at the farm, old man?" 2 boys, I said, and one on the way, perhaps next month. He thinks he's funny, they said. He's spending too much time with his cows. One day I decided to end the teasing once and for all. I pulled out the newspaper article with my windmill and slapped it down on the table. Here, I said, this is what I was doing. My dorm mates were very impressed. Good job, man, they shouted. No one teased me after that. Honestly, it really didn't bother me because after 5 years of being a dropout, I was grateful to be in school. However, I did become homesick, and whenever that happened, I'd hide away in the school library where the books filled rows and rows of shelves. I'd find a chair and study my lesson books in geography, social studies, biology, and math. I'd lose myself in American and African history and within the colorful maps of the world. No matter how foreign and lonely the world was outside, the books always reminded me of home, sitting under the mango tree. While I attended school in Medici, Dr. Makazime was busy making arrangements for Arusha. He helped get me a passport and even took a collection for a new white shirt and black trousers. They were the nicest clothes I'd ever owned. He also gave me useful travel advice. For instance, on a plane, I'd be assigned a seat that was mine and only mine. There was no need to rush or use your elbows like people did in Malawi buses. Also, if the red light was on near the bathroom, that meant it was occupied, and because some passengers become nauseous on a plane ride, each seat came with a paper bag for vomit. This is good information because I was certain I'd need it. In June, I left school and came back to pack. The next morning, the driver appeared to take me to the airport in Lilongwe. Our son is leaving us and traveling by airplane, my father told my mother, smiling. That's right, I said, flying like a bird in the sky. I'll be waving as I pass over. We'll be watching for you. You'll see us here. My father then tucked a bag of roasted peanuts in my pocket. They were still warm. That evening, I was so nervous. I stayed awake in my hotel room watching soccer on Super Sport 3 until the sun came up and it was time to leave. On the plane, I couldn't believe it, but sitting next to me was none other than Soyapa Mumba, the software engineer from Lilongwe who'd first seen my article. Because he's a nice guy, he introduced himself, not knowing who I was. When I told him my name and where I was going, he replied, "Oh my God, William the windmill guy." He explained how excited he was to show the story to Mike McKay, who blog about me on Hacktivate. Suyapi was the very reason anybody had ever heard about me, and now here he was, sitting next to me on the plane. It also happened that Suyapi was a TED fellow himself, being honored for his coding work with Boyabab. I was so fortunate to find him. As the plane taxied toward the runway, I began to notice the others sitting around me. They looked so well dressed and confident, like they had important things to do, and their busy lives required them to travel in jets across the world. As the plane accelerated and lifted its nose in the air, I pressed my head back against the seat and laughed. I was now one of them too. Chapter 15, Meeting Ted and Tom. After arriving in Arusha, I boarded a bus to the Ngurdato Mountain Lodge, where the conference was being held. As the bus exited the airport, I gazed out the window to see if Tanzania looked any different from Malawi, but what I saw was very similar. The highway was filled with minibuses crammed with people. A giant lorry belched smoke and swerved to miss an old man on a bicycle. There were children in rags hawking cigarettes on the roadside while students in bright uniforms marched through the dust to school. I saw village women balancing loads of vegetables on their heads and farmers tending their fields. But unlike Malawi, Arusha had trees, and not only that, after some minutes, the shuttle driver pointed off in the distance and said, "Look there, Kilimanjaro, biggest mountain in Africa." Mount Kilimanjaro appeared even more grand and majestic than I'd seen in books, and with ribbons of white snow along its peak and cloaked in a thin layer of clouds. It was hard to imagine that ordinary people like myself actually climbed to the top, but I knew they did. In my head, I began making a list of all the other places in the world I wanted to see. That mountain filled me with a great confidence, but it all seemed to vanish once I reached the hotel. The lobby was a scene of chaos and confusion, filled with white people speaking English and Africans with strange foreign accents. Everyone was chatting on their mobile phones and talking in loud, booming voices. I prayed that no one would speak to me, and after registering at the Welcome Center, I walked to the corner of the room and tried to disappear. No such luck. After some minutes, a man walked up and stuck out his hand. He had red hair and wore purple and green eyeglasses. "Hello, welcome to TED," he said. "My name is Tom. How are you?" I practiced only one line of English, so I let it fly. "I'm William Kamkwamba. I'm from Malawi." He stared at me strangely. Maybe I'd said it in Chichewa. Wait a minute, he said. You're the guy with the windmill. Tom Riley was in charge of organizing all the corporate sponsors at TED, including the ones who'd paid for my airfare and hotel. Months earlier in New York, Amika, the Nigerian blogger, had told Tom about my windmill, saying, "You'll never believe this story." But Tom didn't know that Amika had then searched under every rock in Malawi to find me. After talking a while, Tom asked if I wanted to tell my story on stage in front of all these people. I shrugged. Why not? Do you have a computer? He asked. I shook my head. Do you have any photos of the windmill? I did have these. A friend of Dr. Makazime's had visited Medici a few weeks earlier and helped prepare a presentation in case I needed it. He'd done this on his laptop, though at the time I had no idea this was a computer. To me, computers were big televisions and plugged into a wall. Before the man left, he handed me a strange cube, a flash drive, attached to a rope, and said, "Wear this around your neck. This is your presentation." So when Tom asked about my photos, I handed him the cube. Then he plugged it into another laptop and said, "I'll just copy these to my computer." It was then that I realized what a laptop was. Of course, I thought it's a portable computer. What a good idea. Sensing my delight at this discovery, Tom asked me, "William, have you ever seen the internet?" "The what?" "No," I said. In a quiet conference room, Tom sat me down and introduced me to the most amazing tool. "This is Google," he said. "You can find answers to anything. What do you want to search for?" That was easy. Windmill. In 1 second, he pulled up 5 million page results, pictures and models of windmills I'd never even imagined. My God, I thought, where was this Google when I needed it? Next, we pulled up a map of Malawi, then a photo of Wimbe itself, taken from a camera in outer space. It's funny to me now, at this conference in East Africa with some of the world's greatest inventors in science and technology just outside the door, there I was in this room, seeing the internet for the first time. Tom helped me set up my own email account, and for the next week he introduced me to a range of technology, smartphones, video, 35mm cameras, even an iPod Nano, which I turned over and over in my hand before finally asking, "Where is the battery?" Not long after, I'd be hacking into iPods and iPhones and repairing them for people. But the most amazing thing about TED wasn't the internet, the gadgets, or even the breakfast buffets, but with 3 kinds of meat, plus eggs and pastries and fruits that I dreamt about each night. It was the other Africans who stood on stage and shared their visions of how to make our continent a better place. There was Corneille Iwango, a biologist from Congo, who'd risked his life to save endangered animals during the country's civil war. He'd even buried his Land Rover engines and stashed lab equipment in the trees to hide them from the rebels. A man from Ethiopia invented a kind of refrigerator that works by using water evaporation from sand. Others were doctors and scientists using creative ideas and methods to fight AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. Even Eric Hirschman was there, one of the first people, along with Mike McKay, to write about my windmill on his blog Aphrodagit. Eric was raised in Kenya and Sudan as the son of missionaries. What he said summed up our crowd perfectly. Where the world sees trash, Africa recycles. Where the world sees junk, Africa sees rebirth. As far as my presentation went, when I heard Chris Anderson, the event's host, call my name, my legs refused to work. "Don't worry," Tom whispered, squeezing my shoulder. "Just take a deep breath." My heart beat fast like a Maganda drum as I climbed the steps to face the audience, which totaled about 450 people, all the inventors and scientists and doctors who'd shared their stories and ideas the previous days. They were now watching me, When I reached the stage and turned around, I went completely blind. Lights from the ceiling were shining into my eyes so bright I couldn't even think. All the words I'd prepared seemed to dance to the drum and get lost in the glare. "We've got a picture," said Chris. He pointed to something behind me, and a giant photo of my parents' house appeared. I saw the mud brick walls, grass roof, bright blue sky. I could feel the sun. "Where is this?" he asked. "This is my home. This is where I live." "Where? What country?" "In Malawi, Kasungu," I said. Then I quickly corrected myself. Kasungu, Malawi. My hands began to shake. "5 years ago, you had an idea," Chris said. "What was that?" "I want to make a windmill." Chris smiled. "So what did you do? How did you realize that?" I took a deep breath and gave it my best. "After I dropped out of school, I went to library and I get information about windmill. Keep going. And I tried and I made it." I expected the audience to laugh at my silly English, but to my surprise, all I heard was applause. Not only were they clapping, but they were standing and cheering. And when I finally returned to my seat, I noticed that several were even crying. After all the years of trouble, the famine, and the fear for my family dropping out of school, Kamba's death, and the teasing I received trying to develop my idea, I was finally being recognized. For the first time in my life, I felt I was surrounded by people who understood what I did. A huge weight seemed to leave my chest and fall to the assembly floor. I could finally relax. I was now among colleagues. For the next couple of days, they lined up to meet me. "William, can I take my photo with you? William, please join us for lunch." One line from my presentation even became a kind of motto for the conference. Everywhere I went, people shouted, "I try," and I made it. I was so flattered. I wish my parents and Gilbert and Jeffrey could be there to see it. They would be so proud. When I first met Tom, he asked me what I hoped to obtain someday in my life. I told him I had 2 goals: to remain in school and to build a bigger windmill to irrigate my family's crops so we would never go hungry again. Basically, this was every Malawian's wish, but Tom seemed confident, and over the next several days, he approached me, many of his friends and colleagues at the conference, and asked for their help. By the time it was over, he raised enough money to get me started. I'm so grateful to everyone who assisted me, and I pray that God bless them all. After the conference, Tom flew back to Malawi to meet my family and to help enroll me in a better school. When the taxi returned to the dirt road toward my house, the windmill appeared in the distance, looking so beautiful. As usual, its blades were spinning fast and causing the tower to sway back and forth. It's more than functional," Tom said. "William, this is art." I gave him the tour of the compound, showing him the car battery and bulb. He laughed at the pile of radio and tractor parts in every corner of my room. "I think every great inventor has a pile of junk someplace," he said. I also demonstrated the light switches, circuit breaker, and the way I had waterproofed my bulb outside. For the porch light, all I had were Christmas lights, so I hollowed out a regular incandescent bulb and wired the Christmas lights inside. This shell served as both water protector and diffuser. "There's more to this than I thought," Tom said. I just laughed. I hadn't even told him about the famine. Back in the long way, Tom and I visited the offices of Boab Health, located in the grounds of Kamuzu Central Hospital, to see Soyapi and finally meet Mike McKay. Boab was founded in 2000 by a British-American computer scientist named Jerry Douglas, who invented a new kind of software to help Malawi hospitals register and treat patients more efficiently. Jerry was out of town at the time of our visit, so Mike and Sayapi gave me the tour. Mike started by showing me a small windmill kit that they were hoping to use to power a village clinic. Its generator was a treadmill motor, which I'd never seen. He stuck the power drill in one end of the motor to make it spin and then took 2 wires and attached them to the voltmeter. It's an amazing gadget. The voltmeter measured the motor's power at 48 volts, which is 4 times stronger than my dynamo. What do you think, Mike asked. Yeah, it's cool. He then gave them both to me as a gift. Oh, thank you, I said. The hole in heaven just kept getting wider. Mike and Sayapi also introduced me to deep cycle batteries. Compared to my car battery, they provide a more stable amount of current for a longer period of time. I wanted to try one of these, so Tom and I went to the office of Solaire, a local solar power dealer. We bought 2 batteries and 4 solar lamps, along with the energy-saving light bulbs and materials to rewire my entire compound. Workers arrived at my village the following week, and for 3 days we replaced old wiring, dug trenches to bury cables, and installed proper light fixtures and plugs. Though I kept my old flip-flop switch just for fun. With quality wire and plastic conduit and buried lines, we never had to worry about fires again. I also stuck to a lightning rod on top of the windmill just in case. Once it was finished, there was a bulb in every room, including 2 outside. I also installed solar panels on my roof to help store the electricity when the wind wasn't blowing. These days, every home in the village has one of these panels, complete with a battery to store power. With each home lighted, the compound finally glowed at night. After being refused by several schools because of my age, I was finally accepted at the African Bible College and Christian Academy in Lilongwe, which was run by Presbyterian missionaries. The headmaster, Chuck Wilson, was an American from California, and my teacher, Laura Lee McLean, was from Canada. Although I was behind the other students, Mrs. McLean and Mr. Wilson agreed to take a chance on admitting me, but Mrs. McLean had one condition, that when I left school each day, I didn't go home to poverty. I had to find a place to live in Lilongwe. Since I had no relatives in town, Jerry offered me a room at his house. I had my own bed and a desk for studying, and the housekeeper, Nancy, prepared plenty of nsima and relish so I didn't feel homesick. Everything was great, but because we were in the city, we experienced power cuts several times a week. After all that hardship to bring electricity to my village, I was still sitting in the dark in my success. You should carry a windmill everywhere you go, Jerry joked. Over time, Jerry became a great friend and teacher. When he still lived in England, he flew airplanes and worked as a helicopter mechanic, so I always asked him questions about motors and such. Sometimes after dinner, he explained how helicopters worked, how the spinning blades captured wind to lift the heavy machines, and how the back rotors kept it from spinning in circles. Jerry also helped me with my English, particularly my L's and R's, something we Chichewa speakers always get confused. These lessons were sometimes done in front of a bathroom mirror so Jerry could demonstrate. Okay, William, watch my tongue and say library. 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 You'll get it. My class at ABCCA used a distance learning curriculum from America that we learned by computer over the internet. Just a couple months before, I'd never even seen the web, and now I used it every day to speak with teachers in Colorado. At first, I was ashamed of my poor English, especially after hearing 5-year-old children speak better sentences. During my first few days, I became quite depressed. But my tutor, a Malawian named Blessings Chikakula, offered some great encouragement. Mr. Blessings had also come from a poor village near Dowa, so poor that he was 30 years old before he got a college degree. Now he was working at ABCCA as a teacher. Don't be discouraged and give up just because it's hard, Mr. Blessings told me. Whatever you want to do, if you do it with all your heart, it will happen. Eventually, the money from my donors at TED allowed me to help my family in many other ways. I installed iron sheets on our compound to replace the grass roofs. I bought mattresses so my sisters didn't have to sleep on the dirt floor, plus covered water buckets to protect our drinking supply from pests. I bought better blankets to keep us warm at night in winter, malaria pills and mosquito nets for the rainy season, and I arranged to send everyone in my family to the doctor and dentist. And for once, I finally managed to repay Gilbert for all the help that he'd given me. Several years before, Gilbert's father had died, and he'd had to drop out of school for lack of money. So with my donations, I put Gilbert back in school, along with Jeffrey and several other cousins who dropped out during the famine. I'd even paid the neighbors' kids' tuition. After years of dreaming about it, I was finally able to drill and bore a borehole for a deep well, which gave my family clean drinking water. My mother said this saved her 2 hours each day carrying water from the public well. Using a solar-powered pump, I filled 2 giant tanks and piped water to my father's field. Irrigation allowed us to plant a second maize crop. The storage room would never be empty again. The spigot from the borehole also free for all women in Wimbe to use. It's the only running water for miles around, and each day dozens of women come to my home to fill their buckets with clean, cool water without having to pump and pump. During my holidays from school, I constructed a bigger windmill that pumped water, which I called the Green Machine on account of its color. The pump now sits in the shallow well at home and irrigates the garden where my mother grows spinach, carrots, tomatoes, and potatoes, both for my family to eat and to sell at market. Finally, the dream had been accomplished. My family couldn't have imagined that with a little windmill I built during the famine would change their lives in every way, and they saw this change as a gift from heaven. Whenever I came home on weekends, my parents had a new nickname. They called me Noah, like the man in the Bible who built the ark, saving his family from God's flood. Everyone laughed at Noah, but look what happened, my mother said. My father agreed. You've put us on the map, and now the world knows we're here. In December 2007, I went to the United States to see the windmills of California, just like the ones in my textbook back home. I landed in New York City right in the middle of winter, wearing only a sweater. The woman in the airline counter then informed me that they'd lost all my luggage. We'll call you, she said. Huh? I didn't even have a phone. Some of Tom's friends met me at the airport. As the taxi pulled out, I finally saw the great American city I'd read so much about. We drove over smooth roads with several lanes in each direction, across bridges with no water underneath, followed by more roads and more bridges. The tall buildings in the distance appeared so pressed together that it was hard to imagine people walking between them, much less building them. It just so happened that Tom lived in one of those buildings in Lower Manhattan. His apartment was on the 36th floor, and I wondered how we would ever get up there. One of his friends then showed me the elevator. What is that? I asked. I pushed the button, and in 10 seconds, I was 36 floors up in the sky. Already, I had so many questions. Inside, Tom greeted me heartily. His apartment was surrounded by windows, looking as if you could walk right over the edge. Before that day, the highest I'd ever been besides an airplane was the top of my windmill. It took me some time to adjust, and that night I had trouble sleeping. The next day, I went underground into the subway, where I watched people enter the gates using sliding money cards. Another great idea. The sidewalks of New York left me exhausted, with hundreds of people running in every direction. One of the things I noticed in New York was that people don't have time for anything, not even to sit down for coffee. Instead, they drink it from paper cups while they walk and send text messages. Sometimes they walk right into you. Touring the city, I began to wonder how Americans could build a skyscraper in a year, but in 4 decades of independence, Malawi couldn't even bring clean water to a village. We could send witch planes into the skies and ghost trucks along the roads, but we couldn't even keep electricity in our homes. We always seemed to be struggling to catch up. Even with so many smart and hardworking people, we were still living and dying like our ancestors. The following week, I flew to California and visited the San Diego Wild Animal Park, where I saw giraffes, hippos, and elephants for the first time. You know, just a half hour from my home in Wimbe was the Kasungu National Park, where all of these same animals lived in the wild. But it took me flying 10,000 miles to America to finally see them up close. I had to laugh. But all the places I went, nothing impressed me more than the windmills of Palm Springs. For a moment after entering the wind farm, I felt like I was back home. The setting was familiar, lush green flatlands and mountains in the distance, and all of it draped in a bright blue sky. But here it was empty space between me and the hills, were miles upon miles of windmills, more than 6,000 of them shooting from the ground like giant mechanical trees. The round white trunks were like the cartoons I'd seen on television, so big around that they could fit my family's entire house. Looking up, I saw the 100-foot blades twirling slowly like the toys of God. Each one stood 200 feet in the air with the wingspan longer than the airplane that had brought me to America. The head engineer of the farm took me inside one of the machines where the computer screens revealed all kinds of information, everything from voltage output to wind and blade speed. In total, the wind farm produced more than 6,000 megawatts, which was delivered to thousands of homes by underground cable. By comparison, just 600 megawatts could light up all of Malawi with energy to spare. At the time, Eskom produced only 224 megawatts. It was an incredible feeling to see the machines that I'd imagined for so long. Now here they were, twisting in the wind before me. I realized that I'd come full circle. The pictures in the book had provided the idea. Hunger and darkness gave me the inspiration, and I'd embarked myself on the long and amazing journey. Standing there, I waited for direction. What would I do next? What is my future? Looking across the field of windmills, I saw how the mountains seemed to tumble and dance along their twirling blades. They seemed to be telling me something that I didn't have to decide right away. I could return to Africa and go back to school. After that, who knows? Perhaps I would study these machines and learn how to build them, then plant my own forest of mechanical trees in Malawi. Perhaps I could even teach people how to build simpler devices like I had at home so they could provide their own light and water. Perhaps I'd do both. Whatever I decided to do, this lesson would always stay with me. If you want to make it, all you have to do is try. All right, that's the end of chapter 15 and the end of our one Seaford book, The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. So with that, I will say good night, sweet dreams, and sleep tight, and we'll see you in the fall.